Lesson 5. Venice, a sinking city. Venice was built on the sea more than 1,000 years ago, and its magnificence sets it apart from any other city in the world. A prominent center of commerce in its early days, this Italian city depended largely on sea trade. Today, Venice's tranquil lagoons, ancient bridges, and vast web of canals attract tens of millions of visitors every year. However, in recent years, the waters of Venice have been a constant source of concern. Rising water levels due to increasing flooding now pose a serious threat to the city's future, and some experts are even speaking as if it were a foregone conclusion that the whole city of Venice will one day be permanently underwater.
Flooding in Venice results from two natural factors. One is acqua alta, which literally means high water. Acqua alta commonly occurs in winter, when a combination of high tides, strong winds, and large waves causes a huge volume of water to surge into the city. This, as one would expect, greatly increases the likelihood of flooding. The other factor is natural subsidence. Venice was constructed on weak marshland, and in consequence, the lack of a solid, stable foundation has caused the city's buildings to sink over time. Venice's subsidence is also due to its location on top of the Adriatic Plate, which is gradually shifting beneath the Apennine Mountains. This shift is causing the land that Venice sits on to drop even further in elevation.
In addition to natural forces, two human factors also pose a real threat to Venice. In the 1930s, for industrial purposes, people began to pump out the water that helped to sustain and support this floating city. This activity caused the rate of subsidence to accelerate dramatically throughout the rest of the 20th century. Although pumping water was banned in the 1970s, considerable damage had already been done. It is estimated that Venice has sunk by about 25 centimeters in the past century alone. As if land subsidence were not a serious enough problem, the city also has to contend with the effects of climate change. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, humans have burned vast quantities of fossil fuels and thus have released excessive carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This process has led to global warming, which in turn has resulted in the polar ice caps melting and the world's sea levels rising. Estimates that the overall water level in Venice will rise by as much as 53 centimeters by 2100 appear to confirm that climate change is having a very serious and dangerous impact indeed.
Both the natural and human factors mentioned have combined to result in frequent flooding in Venice, and the situation is only getting worse. As a matter of fact, in the past century alone, the incidence of flooding has increased from fewer than 10 times a year to more than 60. If this scenario seems hard to imagine, take a glimpse back in history. In November 1966, a high tide swept into Venice, causing a flood that reached an extraordinary height of 194 centimeters and submerged the city for 22 hours. This flood, the highest on record, was nearly matched in 2019 when the water level rose to 187 centimeters. Although this latter instance of flooding was not quite as severe as the 1966 event, it should be noted that this marked the first of 5 instances that year when floodwaters in the city reached heights of over 140 centimeters. Scientists have, unsurprisingly, issued warnings about this trend, and some have even predicted that Venice will cease to exist by the 22nd century.
As the world's sea levels continue to rise, largely owing to human factors, the outlook for Venice remains grim. Indeed, the case of Venice poses a test for humanity, a test of how we can make joint efforts to curb global warming and prevent the environment from being destroyed. Such efforts are far from being the responsibility of only individual governments or groups, but instead require all humans to acknowledge what is happening and work toward the common goal of preserving our beloved Earth for future generations.